Hi, I'm Ruth Vercoe, and welcome back to Demystifying Child's Play, the podcast where we make sense of what's really going on in your child's play so you can parent with more confidence and a whole lot less frustration. This video is part 9 of our 10-part series on the most common play schemas, and today we're diving into one that shows up all the time in toddlers and preschool play, the Enclosure Play Schema. What you're about to hear is taken directly from inside the Play Schemas Collective membership. It's a sneak peek into the video library where I help parents understand the deeper why behind their child's play and learn how to work with it, not constantly fight against it. In this episode, you'll learn what enclosure play actually is, how to spot it in everyday moments, and why things like building fences, drawing borders, or creating no entry zones aren't about being bossy or controlling. They're about learning, safety, and making sense of the world. If you want to dive into all of the top 10 play schemas, head to playschemas.com/free, where you'll find my freebie stash. That's playschemas.com/free. Okay, let's get into it. When we talk about play schemas, we're talking about the deep, instinctive patterns that drive children's play and learning. These are not random behaviours, they're not habits that children need to grow out of, and they're certainly not things that we need to stop or fix. Schemas are how children make sense of the world. And today, we're focusing on one of the most common and often misunderstood play schemas, the Enclosure Play Schema. Okay, let's start with defining the Enclosure Play Schema. The Enclosure Play Schema refers to a child's repeated urge to surround, fence in, border, or contain objects, spaces, or even their own body. To remember this schema and the difference between the enveloping play, I think about enclosure as a zoo, the fence around the animal. Children exploring this schema are deeply interested in creating boundaries, defining spaces, containing objects, and understanding where things begin and end. You'll often see this through play that involves building walls, fences, borders. Children might place blocks around toys, draw borders around their pictures, or create physical spaces that feels closed in or defined. Sometimes children will enclose themselves or pet, wrapping up in fabric, sitting inside boxes, or creating small, contained spaces to play in. This repetition is important. It's not accidental. It's how all this learning happens. Okay, enclosure and enveloping are very closely related, but they do have some key differences. So let's touch on what enclosure is and what it is not. One of the most helpful things we can do as adults is really get clear on what enclosure actually is. The key thing to remember is this: the object or space being enclosed is still visible. So again, the object or space being enclosed is still visible. Children can see what's inside the boundary they've created. This is what makes the enclosure schema different from the other schemas that often might get confused with it. For example, enclosure is not storing objects away, it's not hiding them out of sight, and it's not fully covering objects so they disappear. Those behaviours usually fall under other schemas like enveloping. With enclosure, the child wants to define edges, not remove the objects completely. And that distinction does matter because it helps us to respond in the right way. I also recommend you head to the enveloping section to help you get your head fully in the game with the differences. Okay, the enclosure play schema most commonly appears during the toddler years, the preschool years, and into early primary school. That said, the foundations of the enclosure schema start much earlier, and the schema can continue to resurface as children grow. So pretty much, it's always happening and you can't get away from it. When you're watching your child in play, enclosure often shows up in block play, small world play, which simply means playing with plastic animals or figures, dramatic play, also known as dress-ups, and art or drawing, also outdoor construction and fort building. If you've ever noticed your child is constantly building fences around their play, creating no entry zones, defining spaces that must not be disturbed, then it's a very good chance you're seeing this enclosure schema in action. Okay, so why does this schema matter so much? I always love this part of talking about schemas because enclosure is deeply connected to a child's developing sense of order, predictability, control, and emotional safety. When children create boundaries, they're learning about how the world works. They're exploring questions like what belongs inside, what stays out, what happens if a boundary changes. This supports important skills such as spatial awareness, early mathematical thinking, problem solving, planning, and organization. But just as importantly, enclosure supports emotional regulation. Defined spaces help children feel safe. When a child builds a boundary, they're often creating a world that feels manageable, especially in environments that otherwise might feel overwhelming. This is why enclosure play can be incredibly calming for some children and really good for teaching about body autonomy, What is mine? What is yours? What can be touched? What can't? Okay, I'm just going to backtrack here with something I said before. You may have heard me say control and be thinking, oh no, this is not for me. I'm not going to let my toddler have any more control than they already have. So let's quickly cover enclosure, control, and emotional safety, because this is where enclosure is often misunderstood. And again, this makes understanding play schemas a game changer, because when you understood them, they're a lot less likely to be misunderstood. Now, adults sometimes worry that children who are focused on enclosure are being rigid, bossy, or overly controlling. But when we look at it through a developmental lens, we see something very different. Children are not trying to control other people for the sake of just controlling them. They're trying to understand and control their environment. Enclosure gives children a sense of ownership over space, confidence in their decisions, and reassurance that the world has structure. This is especially important for children who are sensitive, anxious, or navigating big emotional changes. For these children, enclosure play isn't a problem, it's a coping strategy, and a good one at that. Okay, as we finish up this module, I want to leave you with a reminder that runs true through all the different play schemas. Enclosure is not something to stop. It's not something to rush through, and it's definitely not something to correct. This is not controlling behaviour for the sake of it. This is learning in action. When we understand the enclosure play schema, we can shift from asking, why are they doing this? To saying, I see that they're learning here. And that shift changes everything. It allows us to support play more confidently, reduce unnecessary power struggles, and create environments that truly meet where children are. In the next sections of this module, we'll explore exactly how enclosure schema shows up in everyday play, how you can support it safely, intentionally, and with confidence. And as always, as we finish up, do not forget you can ask Archie the Archives King all things enclosure, ask him all your questions. And if you can't answer, just flick me a DM or comment below using @Ruth Vercoe so I don't miss it. Okay, I'll see you in one of the other videos.